inside a mystery
that is trapped in the house of an unanswered question.
A child of the micro, retro revivals and the path back to play. Part 1. The IRA had just bombed Harrods. The Greenham Commons Women's Peace Camp were spending their third Christmas protesting against nuclear weapons. The Flying Pickets were number one with Only You, and shops throughout the country were experiencing riotous scenes from mobs of unruly parents trying to get their grubby hands on the most sought-after children's Christmas present since the Rubik's Cube, the Cabbage Patch Kid. But I didn't care about any of that, because on Christmas Eve 1983, I retired to bed safe in the knowledge that I was going to receive my best Christmas present ever. It would be an item that would inform, educate, and most importantly, entertain me for several years to come. A design classic of British ingenuity that would spark my imagination, open me to the new technological revolution, and perhaps most importantly, provide me with access to a whole new circle of friends. Christmas could not happen soon enough for that 14-year-old me, and when the sun finally rose over King's Standing on that fateful Christmas morning, my head became a tangled blur of colour-clashed pixels. The sense of expectation was palpable as I ripped off the wrapping paper and opened the box. That heady whiff of polystyrene and electronics as I unveiled the contents, an aroma I would never forget. The money shot, though, nestling among cables, plugs and manuals, was a beautiful sight to behold, one that would make any teenage boy of the times weak at the knees. Adorned with its signature rainbow streak and its iconic rubber keys, each responsible for a confusing array of commands and functions. I quickly commandeered the family colour TV, turned off Roland Rat's Winter Wonderland, connected some cables and turned a knob to retune the channel. And there, before my eyes, was a white screen with the words Sinclair Research 1983 written in small text at the bottom. This was confirmation that I had joined the micro revolution, an exclusive club of thousands of excited teenagers who had all received a Sinclair ZX Spectrum from Santa. As I said, my memory of that Christmas day is hazy, but I do know that I spent most of the day playing the handful of games that I'd managed to get with it, namely Horace Goes Skiing, Manic Miner and Daley Thompson's Decathlon. I was quickly shoved off the big TV to make way for the big Christmas afternoon movie, The Capture of Grizzly Adams, and had to make do with a small black and white portable that my mum used to watch weepy old classics on weekend afternoons while she was cooking the tea. I remember the exhilaration of putting fingers to rubber, of repeatedly going like the clappers so that I could get my Olympic athlete to run faster or jump longer and higher. How could I forget my baptism of fire into platform games, guiding minor willies past screens filled with excruciatingly difficult and annoying obstacles in order to collect flashing keys, bananas and boxes before the air ran out. The frustration of seeing that boot squash down on you for the zillionth time, indicating another failed attempt. Expert precision and nerves of steel were required to steer past the pitfalls, and despite playing the game for most of the day, I probably only got past the first screen. The music that greeted you on successful loading and between games was an equally harsh, garish and unforgettable version of the normally serene The Blue Danube, originally composed by Strauss. It always seemed to blast out of the speakers at ear-bleeding volume. I imagine it would have no doubt caused my mum to shout, "Nicky, turn that bloody racket down. I'm trying to watch the Jim'll Fix It Christmas special." Little did we know. I was lost in a whirlwind of gameplay, and quick as a flash, the day was at an end. Though, to be honest, I wasn't too gutted that I'd missed the BBC's late showing of the Spinners in concert at York, something I know my parents would have embarrassingly enjoyed. It had definitely been the most exciting Christmas day ever, and at least I had the rest of the holidays to perfect my technique and work on those high scores before returning to school, where my mates would be eager to take the piss out of any shoddy gameplay. My campaign to have the best Christmas ever had started earlier that year, when I became aware that some of my school friends were already beginning to enjoy the benefits of owning a personal computer. Also, that illegal contraband in the form of pirated game cassettes were being secretly exchanged and slipped into school bags. The Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum seemed the most popular models, and TV shows like the computer program, designed to show off the wonders of the BBC Micro in particular, were gathering popularity. But one of the things that may have clinched my procurement of the mighty Micro was a careers fair that happened at my school that very year, possibly just months before Christmas. I remember I attended with one or both of my parents and was quite keen to show them the stall promoting a career in computing. It didn't quite occur to me that I would need to have a really good grasp of mathematics to be able to progress in this profession, as I was too busy trying to convince my folks that having my own computer would be hugely beneficial in securing a lucrative position as a programmer or some such job, earning literally hundreds of pounds. The ploy went well, and my mum chatted to the very knowledgeable and friendly gentleman who manned the stall. I think he told her that computing was a secure career for the future, and if I could manage to get a foothold in it, I would have a job for life. I may have piped up with something like, "Wouldn't I stand a better chance if I already had some experience with programming? Say if I had my own computer?" Which the man would definitely have agreed with, probably recommending the BBC Micro, though I would later steer my mum clear of this option for two reasons. For starters, it was a lot more money, and also because it was advertised on telly as more of an educational investment and didn't seem to have many good gaming options. I kept stum to my folks about this second reason, of course, and worked on promoting the cheaper model, one that had programming possibilities as well as plenty of gaming ones too. My parents may have attached some conditions to me getting a computer for Christmas, and of course I had obviously agreed to them all. Things like attending school more. I had a nasty habit of feigning sickness and had previous for escaping from educational facilities, partly because I hated them so much. But I was willing to put up with all of that if I could get my grubby hands on a Spectrum for Christmas. And anyway, I could always go back to my old ways once I'd got the damn thing. Although the ZX Spectrum was one of the cheaper micros of the time, it was still a hefty investment for working class parents like mine. I didn't and still don't know how they managed to raise the money for it. I was just eternally grateful that they had. I tried looking back through my old diaries from the time to see if I can put more meat on the bones of my threadbare memory. But alas, the first mention of my new computer isn't until April the 7th, 1984, before which I hadn't made any entries since October 1983. In a brief news flash, I announced my recent acquisition and that I was using Mum's TV with it. I'm quite sure that at some point before Christmas though, I would have gone with my parents to somewhere like Dixon's or Woolworths so I could tell them which model to buy. After all, I didn't want to get stuck with an Auric 1 like one of my unfortunate muckers. But for the life of me, I seem to have no memory of such an event, which is puzzling, given that it would have been such an exciting occasion. It's very possible that they got the computer and hid it away until Christmas, but knowing my younger self, I would have been searching for it in all the usual hiding places all over the house. When normality resumed after the festive period, I got into a steady routine with my computer. Namely, at any given opportunity, I would be sat in front of it immersed in a variety of games which I had acquired by either saving pocket money or swapping or copying games from friends. Conveniently, there were a few game publishers who offered a budget range, such as Mastertronic, Firebird and Codemasters, with titles priced at around $1.99. So, come the weekend, I'd pocket my pocket money and zip up to the shops to spin the carousel of games round and round, taking ages to decide which to invest in. Many of these games were actually good and very playerful, titles like Booty, Nighttime and Thrust, but some were equally horrendous and sometimes it just came down to the luck of the draw. I remember one of the early games I enjoyed was called Battlezone, released through Quicksilver. It was a first-person shooter using wireframe 3D graphics, where you drive a tank that must do battle against a range of enemies. Like many of the games in those days, you had to use your imagination to compensate for the rather crude graphics, but when cracks started to appear on your screen, you knew it was only a matter of time before it was game over. In my diary in late 1984, I did occasionally list some of the games I was playing, including Horace and the Spiders, Wheelie, Cookie, A Tic Tac and Trashman, which I particularly remember playing at the time. The game has a simple premise, as many did back then. You play a trash man, dustbin man, who has to collect rubbish from the neighbourhood against the clock. You must collect as much trash as you can from the houses in the street and empty them into your rubbish lorry. You are hampered in this quest by obstacles including various dogs and speeding cars. You must return every bin you empty, and if in the process you venture onto the grass, your timer decreases even faster. Extra bonus points can be gained after you deliver a bin back, when invariably the front door will open and you will receive a humorous offer to do some kind of menial task for the homeowner. It's one of the more original and bizarre games of the times, but I certainly enjoyed playing it. Maybe I missed my calling and should have gone for a career in refuge collection instead. What I soon realised through having a Spectrum was that I was immediately included into a community of its owners, that I had a way into becoming friends with kids at school who, until that point, remained elusive, mainly because I was shy and reclusive. Game playing gave me some confidence in having something to enthuse about with my peers, and because it was so popular and nearly every kid had a machine, it would have been a hindrance if I hadn't got one, to be honest. Also, networking with others was essential if you wanted to extend your library of games and swap game hints and tips. A big part of the experience of owning a microcomputer, and one that at the time every child would have wished away, was the inevitability of waiting for the chosen game to upload from your trusty tape machine. Type in that now sacred command, load speech marks, and witnessing those multicoloured bars and erratic symphony of high-pitched tones. It was very common when playing a game over and over, through having to load it continually, that after a while you would know exactly where you were in the loading process just by listening to the scramble of tones. Most games during loading would treat you to a fancy loading screen, a patchwork quilt of coloured sprites arranged into a piece of original artwork. Some were quaint, basic and straight to the point, flashing words announcing said game was loading, but others stretched the medium and managed to create a whole new genre of CRT screen art that would burn itself into my memory, instilling an infused excitement of anticipation in what was to come that would often than not lead to disappointment. Some of the best of these artworks had a bold originality that seemed to jump off the screen at you. Larger-than-life characters from the game would appear before my eyes as line by line the picture was reproduced in front of my eyes, colour being the final element to wash down the screen and quicken my heartbeat. The 8 bright basic colours of the spectrum were enough to make any image stand out, but if arranged correctly, these loading artworks were a thing of beauty. Of course, I say this now in retrospect, as at the time, all the 14-year-old me was thinking was, God, I hope this gets to the end and I don't get the dreaded error message, R-tape loading error, which meant you had to rewind and start all over again. Either that, or the screen would glitch into a display of pixelated modern art, or even worse, just simply reset itself. Of course, in all the excitement of shooting aliens, delivering trash and collecting keys, I couldn't forget that there was another side of owning a microcomputer, and having promised Mom that I'd become a big-time programmer, I did venture enthusiastically into the world of Sinclair Basic. I was helped in this venture by the brilliant programming manual which came with the computer, written by Stephen Vickers. It was a self-contained guide from first steps right through to introducing machine code. Everything you needed to know about coding in BASIC was included, from printing your own name on the screen through to graphics, the character set, music, and understanding how computer memory works. I distinctly remember spending a considerable amount of time with the manual, typing in the example programs and writing some of my own very simple subroutines. I don't know how far I got through it, but it did inspire me to think that I might actually have a chance at this programming lark. Tapping into the zeitgeist of the microcomputer boom, Marshall Cavendish began publishing a weekly part work magazine called Input during 1984. Its byline was, "Learn programming for fun and the future." Plus it was handily designed with the most popular models in mind, including my Specky, and as soon as I saw it being trailed on TV, I just thought, this is exactly what I need. It was colourful and bold and just seemed made for someone like me. So, using my pocket money, I started the long 52-issue 4-binder journey. Yes, things started out pretty simple with simple programming techniques like 4-next loops and randomizing numbers, and some simple graphics and animation concepts, but also explored machine code and assembling. For myself, I remember trying my hand at a number of programming projects. They were admittedly quite simple, like drawing images on the screen, creating titles and rolling credits for my silly home videos that I'd made, and even attempting text adventure games. I remember at one point I was making a map for an idea I had for an adventure game, but this may have been when I was using a software aid that made creating a game a lot easier. At the end of the day, although I had the creativity and ideas, I just lacked the technical ability and patience for coding. There are several large software programs that were built up over the course of the Input magazine, including a database solution, a text adventure, and a machine code arcade game. It was all beautifully presented with high quality printed pages. But although I had collected the whole series, I had pretty much given up on understanding programming concepts, which had become a bit too tedious for me to type in. I have many fond memories of sitting at the wooden kitchen table in my bedroom, which I'd inherited when our nan had bought us a new one, with my Spectrum, slaving away for hours, keying in bytes of code. only to press run and get an error message telling me that there was a bug which needed correcting, usually a typo which was corrected several issues down the line. All that said though, Input did give me a foundational knowledge of programming and covered other topics such as hardware. It opened my mind to what computers could do and where things were likely to go in the future. When I left school in 1985, I ended up on one of Thatcher's awful YTS schemes. At the time, I thought this was the beginning of an illustrious career, commenting in my diary. "I'm glad to say my career troubles are over. I've got on a YTS in computers. It's called CompuCentre in Edgbaston." Within 3 months though, I realised that this was pretty shit and hopped over to another YTS in Aston that claimed to be an iTech and offered computer programming, electronics and office training. In reality, my biggest achievement in programming was spending months with a pretty useless database program on a Commodore PET. I think some of the subroutines actually worked, though if you tried to delete a record, it would invariably come back into the database like a ghost to haunt a baffled and bemused me. So alas, I didn't cut it as a programmer, but I did meet someone who turned out to be a long-time buddy for many years, who did have the knack for coding and could very easily write a working database with bells on. This was of course while the other students were off writing menu sequences to launch their favourite games of the day. Since the Spectrum had launched in 1982, many magazines dedicated to it had popped up in places such as Woolworths and WH Smith's. One of my favourites was Crash magazine, which was first published in 1984 by Newsfield Publications. The monthly magazine was essential reading for any Specky owner, as it rated and reviewed all the latest games. I remember browsing its pages on many bus journeys to my mate's house, where we'd engage in an evening of gaming whilst listening to the soundtrack of 80s pop electronica. But it wasn't just the game reviews that were important. Crash was a creation filled with humour and somehow managed to make me feel that I belonged to an exclusive club. There were playing tips, readers' letters and features on the programmers behind the games I was playing. We literally lived and breathed the Spectrum back in those days, and acquiring the latest games that pushed the very limits of the humble ZX to its limits was all our tiny minds could think about. We would attend computer conventions and exhibitions where all of the computer manufacturers and software houses, both big and small, would push their latest wares. The names of those mostly homegrown companies were household names to us. I remember going to one of the Personal Computer World shows in London at either Olympia or Earl's Court. The PCW was more for the home computer market, and all the big software houses were there demoing their new games. There was a real buzz about the place as hordes of nerdy kids fought over themselves for a go on the latest shoot 'em up or arcade conversion. There were gimmicks including big set designs and a small scattering of folk prancing around in fancy dress, cosplay still being a thing of the future. I also remember going to the brother of the PCW show, the Which Computer Show at the NEC in Birmingham, possibly around 1986. Not knowing what company to put on my name badge, I think I wrote something like NT Soft Limited, and just hoped that none of the store holders would actually ask me what my company actually did. Being more business orientated, which was not so concerned with shooting aliens and dodging planetoids, it was attended mostly by suited businessmen who were looking for software and hardware solutions that improved productivity and network capability. They would tend to get a bit more nervous when us snotty-nosed teenagers invaded the stands, randomly pressing buttons on the merchandise with our greasy little fingers. These shows were huge fun, and we would invariably leave with several bags bulging with promotional magazines, stickers, badges and flyers that we would adorn our bedroom walls with. I had many years of faithful service out of my trusty 48K Spectrum, and only once did it have a breakdown needing specialised respite. I imagine though that those days without it, awaiting its safe return, were a worrying time for my younger counterpart. Eventually it came back and soldiered on for a year or so more before finally giving up the ghost around 1986, and because there was now an upgrade in the shape of the Spectrum 128, I decided to buy one of those instead of opting for another repair, resigning my old machine to the loft where it stayed for a few years more until eventually I decided, much to my dismay, to throw it into the rubbish. How I wish I had not done that now. The Spectrum 128 offered a better keyboard and graphics, improved sound and a handy, neat heatsink that was much needed in my bedroom during the winter months. With more memory to play with, the games were more slick and polished affairs, titles such as Starglider, Carrier, Command, Fairlight, Hacker and Micronaut 1, which I personally have many fond memories of. All had expanded versions which used the full potential of the 128 to great effect. But it didn't stop there. Utility software also took advantage of the machine. I distinctly remember buying and using the Artist from Soft Technics, which was a beautifully full-functional digital graphics solution. It even had a Mac-like mouse pointer that you used to select the multitude of menu options. The big brother of the Spectrum 48K held my interest until the late 80s when 16-bit home computers took on the mantle of moving the revolution up the technological ladder. I'm not sure what happened to my 128, whether it died or I sold it on to pay towards my next computer, the Atari ST, but it brought an end to many happy and fulfilled years using Spectrums. I certainly knew that the Sinclair name continued under Amstrad with floppy disk drive versions of the 128, but wasn't aware until recently of how popular the machines were around the world, with many unofficial clones produced in countries like East Germany and Hungary, to name but a few, and that in the absence of any official production or upgrades after the demise of Sinclair, home computer enthusiasts would continue the legacy by taking matters into their own hands, producing a raft of emulators that would have kept the Spectrum name alive on desktop computers and smartphones until the present. In recent years, the Spectrum Next home computer, produced from funding via a Kickstarter campaign, has successfully inspired many programmers to pick up the baton where the 128 left off and create new gaming adventures beyond the scope of those original machines. Moving from the Spectrum to the Atari ST felt at the time to be a massive step up. 16-bit games were smoother, more detailed and used hundreds of colours. World-building games such as Civilization and Populous were amazing, but they didn't really appeal to me. I much preferred Bomberjack, Lemmings and some of the racing games which were handled so much better by the ST's superior graphics. Ultimately though, the platform lacked some of the charm and warmth of the Spectrum's appeal. The homegrown British eccentricity was missing, replaced by the faceless Atari Corporation. The ST couldn't compete with the explosion of originality and uniqueness of the thousands of games that the Spectrum had enjoyed. My enthusiasm for gaming by this point had begun to dwindle so much that when the all-singing all-dancing console heavyweights, Sega, Nintendo and later the Sony PlayStation, barged onto the scene, I just wasn't interested. I had moved on to other creative endeavours, investing in an Amstrad PCW, a computer which you definitely couldn't play games on. It was perfect for someone who had illusions of grandeur like me and thought they were going to knock out a novel every week. I kept it for a few years, its best use being as a database for my extensive collection of pirated TV and films on VHS. A few years later, I would get my first PC and lose myself in the World Wide Web. Those long-lost teenage years of gaming were far behind me, and though I would occasionally use an emulator to remind myself of some of those happy memories, it just wasn't the same experience. Anyway, the joys of married life, parenthood, and the stresses of having a mortgage and working 9 till 5 would soon put many years between me and those carefree days. You were our rock and roll, our Rolling Stones, but instead of tunes, you wrote in codes, blazoned on posters across bedroom walls, houses where games we played on were born. From Atlantis to Arctic, on Kempstons and Keys, we'd do battle after school until called for our teas. A&F's task for Harry was to collect all the eggs, while Bug Bite sent Willy down mines we could never perfect. CRL took us in a skimmer to a planet called Tau Ceti, then gave us extra missions in the sequel Academy. Like a stealthy ninja, we hunted floppy disks in Durrell's action-adventure, sabotaging with drop kicks. Elite gave us Bombjack, while Firebird made us Elite. High jumps and light speed leaps, arcade zings and trade runs to meet. Faster Than Light brought us Lasermation. With smooth scrolling light force, we got stunning animation. In Turnanog, we held on to youth in a land haunted by the she. Celtic myth brought to life in Gargoyles, epic roaming free. In Gremlins Jack the Nipper, we were naughty baby boys, points for causing chaos and trying to annoy. Hewson took us to Avalon in Marak's astral form. Against the Lord of Chaos, we quested night till morn. Imagine the name of the game, from Jumping Jack to Zip Zap, collecting hearts around school, breaking blocks with digital bats. Browsing pocket money classics on Mastertronics carousel. If you didn't like your purchase, you could do a swap or sell. Melbourne made us hobbits, from novel to TV screen, goblins, dwarfs and dragons in an interactive dream. High-speed pursuits through forests in Microgen's Death Chase, taken back to the classroom in Microsphere's school days. A niche idea from New Generation, collecting trash on busy streets, from beautifully pruned gardens. Against the clock it was hard to beat. Rambo, Robocop, Terminator, an ocean of licensed games. Daley Thompson's Decathlon, another of their claims to fame. Quicksilver gave us innovation with an isometric view. Ant Attack was one of a kind, the start of something new. We fought against star gliders, laser beams filling the screen, in Rainbird's wire-framed hit with definite Star Wars themes. Willy was back to tidy his mansion in software projects Manic expansion. Ultimate played the game from Jetman to Jetpack, Saberwolf and Nightlaw, Cookie and a Tick Attack. US Gold brought Uncle Sam to Brum as Indiana searched for the Holy Grail. Goonies found pilfered pirate treasure, Impossible Mission's secret agent tale. Listen kid, get this game called Bugsy from Zeppelin, 'cause it's real good. Help this rabbit take over the mobs and we won't trash your specky, understood? Chips and tunes, zaps and zooms, colour clashes, crash smashes, bits and bipes, bugs and sprites, high scores, two-player wars. These were the games we played into the night, imaginations illuminated by twinkling lights. Back in the days when micros ruled, we swapped our games in playgrounds and schools. Those times may be long gone, but 8-bit memories still live on in emulators that resuscitate those glory games that once shone. You know, I never thought for a minute that some 40 years after I'd first opened my Spectrum in 1984, that there would be another chance to relive those days again. But, of course, I was wrong. Part 2. The Return. I had been, until recently, totally oblivious to the recent rise in the popularity of retro gaming, in that people of a certain age, mainly over 50, have been going up into their lofts or down into their cellars, digging around, dusting off their old 1980s or 90s microcomputers and consoles and plugging them in with the hope that they don't burst into flames, but instead spring into life. Many of those relics have needed a helping hand, a modification or a replacement of parts in order to spark back to life, and when, with some patience, their owners have successfully navigated that seemingly prehistoric method of loading software via cassette tape, they have been pleasantly surprised by what they have found, a kind of time machine, if you like, back to a simpler but no less rewarding or challenging experience. But not everyone is tech savvy enough to resuscitate an antiquated circuit board, which means that many have either had to take a punt on buying a restored machine second hand, or have quietly waited in the wings for other solutions to present themselves. Retro Games Limited, a British company, have taken up that challenge in the last few years, releasing both mini and full-size replicas of machines such as the VIC-20, the Commodore 64, the Amiga A500 and the Atari 400. These machines all house sophisticated emulators capable of mimicking the original computers, but with modern outputs and USB capability to store downloaded software and games. On the outside, the original designs have been replicated in amazing detail, giving the user a chance to once again experience those halcyon days of personal microcomputing. When word got out last year that Retro Games Limited were planning on releasing a full-size working copy of the ZX Spectrum, simply called the Spectrum, my interest piqued and I pre-ordered one. There was a real buzz around this particular release. On social media, speculation was rife about the machine and what it would or wouldn't be capable of doing. Finally, in late November, the Spectrum was released and arrived at my door. My plan, like many others who had also pre-ordered, was to save the unboxing until Christmas, affording me the opportunity to relive, in some way, that golden Christmas of 1983. Of course, I had to examine the contents of the box to see if it had arrived safely in one piece, so I had one peek inside. What I found was a thing of beauty. There it was, in all its glory, millimetre perfect, colour matched to perfection, the rubber keys with the same squashiness as I remembered, that signature 4-strand rainbow adorning the bottom right corner. Spotting the difference would have been difficult if not for the name and the updated connections at the front. HDMI and USB connectors aplenty. I quickly placed it back in the box, stowed it away, and waited. Most of us aren't blessed with a photographic memory, so with the passing of time, our recollection of events slowly fades. Something that was once front and centre moves further back as newer memories are recorded. Bright, sharp and full, becomes dull, blurred and fragmented. Eventually, we are left with a few momentary glimpses that float on the surface, while underneath, lost in the darkness of the deep, lie the scrambled remnants of the past. Sensory stimulation in the form of art, specifically vision, iconic memory, and sound, echoic memory, can aid us in triggering the play button on those lost recordings. It could be hearing Debussy's Clair de Lune or Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here that turns the key and opens the door. Similarly, gazing into Van Gogh's Starry Night or watching The Wizard of Oz might take us back in time. It could be something as simple as reading a line from a poem or rereading a favourite novel. Other senses too have the power to illuminate the long forgotten. The smell, olfactory memory of a Sunday roast, or the taste, gustatory memory of lemonade fizzing on the palate, for instance. Haptic memory too can have the same effect in relation to our interactions with objects, especially in particularly sensitive areas such as our hands and face. Properties like the texture and spatial density of an object have been shown to activate the formation of memory, so the softness of a furry childhood toy or the squishiness of a rubber key under fingers could be enough to assist our recall. Just one of the above sensory prompts could provoke a strong memory, but in combination, as a multi-sensory modality, they would generate an even stronger response that would be easier to call back in the future. Added to that though, we know that in childhood, the engagement of the imagination is a particularly important tool in creative play, leaving a significant mark on our memory. Additionally, children develop strong emotional ties to toys during play, brought about by the intensity of excitement, joy and happiness. Toys can also offer a place of safety as the child escapes into a world of self-made fantasy. For these reasons, an iconic childhood gadget such as a microcomputer with an almost unlimited creative and imaginal potential would obviously infuse itself into the psyche of a child, implanting memories and emotional connection. Though, at the time, a child would be so engrossed in that world that they wouldn't really appreciate how strong that bond was, until perhaps the object is no longer around. For instance, I certainly realised how much a part of my life my Spectrum was when it had to be sent off to be repaired. But let's say the absence is longer, some 40 odd years for instance. Would the same feelings and emotions come to the surface when I was again introduced to my old micro in its new form as the Spectrum? Was the recreation good enough to stir some of those old memories? And would the older, worldly wise me be as enthusiastic about having it back in my life? Of course, it was always going to be different the second time around. Nothing could be as impactful as that first time. So when Christmas Day 2024 finally arrived, I wasn't surprised that I didn't get up at 6 AM to open my presents like my 1984 counterpart. But I was glad that I had waited a few weeks extra purely for nostalgic reasons, as it just created that moment of having come full circle. That, in a way, I was acknowledging a special anniversary of something important. Later that morning, when I had a moment to plug my new Specky in, there was certainly a feeling of déjà vu, especially on seeing and playing some of the old games that had started it all for me all those years ago, i.e. like Manic Miner. It felt so natural going back to these old friends, like Little Willie the Miner, as if part of me had laid dormant and had suddenly woken up. Muscle memory with the help of those rubber keys just seemed to kick in and take over. That said, I definitely found the new features of the Spectrum, the ability to save games and rewind play, a godsend in getting Willie through those caverns a bit quicker. But the old frustrations of the game still had me screaming at the monitor in anger like a moody 14-year-old. Particularly welcome and significant was the inclusion inside the Spectrum box of a special edition of the iconic Crash magazine, newly launched a few years ago with the blessing of the original creators Roger Keane and Oliver Fry. The magazine has been going from strength to strength as a bi-monthly publication in both digital and printed formats, and I found it well worth my while to get reacquainted with it and the excellent reviews of both old and new games inside its covers, which still sport those wonderful Oliver Fry masterpieces. Like many of my generation, who have also been getting reacquainted with their micros, a lot has happened to me since my original Specky and I had parted company. The responsibilities of modern life, like having a mortgage, being a husband, parent and holding down a job, have brought their own challenges, as has navigating the death of parents. The world has changed too, of course, not to mention the march of technology, the dawn of smart devices and the recent ascent of AI into all of our lives. These innovations are even more prescient on viewing some of the excellent documentary films that have been lovingly made about the spectrum and computer gaming in general. For a detailed overview of how spotty teenagers messing around with micros in their bedrooms morphed into the high-flying multi-million-pound corporations that dominate today's gaming industry, you can't beat Nicola and Anthony Caulfield's Kickstarter-funded 2014 film, From Bedrooms to Billions, covering a span of 30 years, from the simple Pong tennis games of the 70s through to the expansive open-world masterpieces that the next generation of gamers are enjoying today. The film really does leave you with a sense of awe at how much things have moved along. The Caulfields' recent sequel, The Rubber-Keyed Wonder, focuses on the Sinclair story and is a must for anyone who has owned and loved a Spectrum. Both of these films have valuable input from both programmers who made some of the most iconic games and the players that enjoyed them. They're available to watch on demand and to also buy physically. Elsewhere, there are two other independently made films that are worth a watch, both with a slightly more DIY aesthetic. Will Brooker's 2020 film, The ZX Spectrum Experience, available to watch on YouTube, is an enjoyable nostalgia-filled hour of reminiscences by those that played the games, particularly focusing on the role that the imagination played in bringing those early games to life in our heads. Andy Remick's 2017 film, Memoirs of a Spectrum Addict, also has detailed interviews with those that wrote, played and reviewed the games. I particularly liked Andy's attempts to recreate some of those iconic memories that many Spectrum fans will be familiar with, including that magical Christmas morning, playground tape swapping and the endless wait for games to load. The film is available to purchase directly by contacting Specky Addict on Facebook or emailing andy.remickretro@outlook.com. With nearly a month past now since Christmas, I've found the chance to rewind things to more simpler times has been quite refreshing but no less challenging. Yes, the games require the user to suspend reality and fill in the blanks, but the addictiveness, payoff and reward for putting in the time and effort have much in common with what my 16-year-old son has been highly invested in since an early age. But what has he made of Dad's quirky little box and its quaint games? Well, I've been pleasantly surprised that he has shown an interest at least. Games such as Penetrator, a version of the old arcade game Scramble, a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up where you control a craft through a series of simple but challenging landscapes and tunnels littered with rockets and enemy ships, have definitely caught his imagination. For instance, we had quite an excitable session in front of the Specky on Christmas Day trying to progress through the levels, which reminded me a little of those heady days when I'd gather with my mates to play the latest Crash Smashes. And there have been other games which have piqued his interest. In fact, one that I rediscovered the other night was Faster Than Light's excellent Light Force, a beautifully smooth vertical scrolling game which I remember playing quite a lot back in the day. Again, it's a blast everything in sight affair, and I think this is what appeals to my son. Maybe that's because in these modern times, teens have little patience to wait for the plot of a game to unravel, especially if there's an absence of lifelike graphics. Personally, I think I'm still in a stage of discovering some of those old games that I'd long forgotten. For instance, I recently had a distinct memory of playing a game which consisted of flying down various wireframe tunnels avoiding moving obstacles, while at the same time listening to Jean-Michel Jarre's 1987 Rendezvous album. But I couldn't quite remember the name of the game until I asked the question on a Spectrum group on Facebook. Turns out I had confused two games, Micronaut 1 and 3D Starglider, and I think I kind of merged them into one in my own mind. Unlike the younger me, I no longer have endless hours of leisure at my disposal, so I'm finding that I'm just booting up the Spectrum ad hoc when I have time and working my way through all those games I remember, and those I don't, and there are quite a few. As I said, it kind of feels like finding an old friend, and I suspect retro gaming, though it doesn't feel that retro to me, as someone who never really moved on to modern games, will form a part of my spare time between reading, music, films and other creative pursuits. You might be thinking, so what? Why go back to something that is classed as inferior tech by today's standards? Why can't I just play something modern? Or just leave the whole thing alone? Because let's face it, I had left that part of my life behind, in the past. And for that matter, aren't Retro Games Limited just cashing in on my childhood nostalgia? A lot of people will certainly think so, because me playing Spectrum games in 2025 is a bit like the 13-year-old me getting excited about playing with a spinning top from the 1940s. Yes, I admit the nostalgia is a big part of the attraction in wanting to go back, but an important byproduct of that is the chance to reconnect with the child within and his world of imagination and creativity, which can in turn nourish our emotional, mental and social well-being in ways that are often overlooked. Yes, I know I'm getting a bit woo-woo, but bear with me. Constructive creative play is important as it takes us away from the stresses and strains of modern life and provides a safe space to improve our problem-solving skills without any fear of embarrassment. Activities such as playing computer games not only stimulates the brain, keeping it sharp and focused, but can take us away from the nagging worries and pressures we may have. Play also helps us to relax, well, perhaps not while playing Manic Miner, promoting the release of endorphins which improve our overall mood and reminds us of the joy, wonder and curiosity we felt when we engaged in play as children. I think it's far too easy these days to be seduced by the media and the doom-mongering news, which is more often than not depressing and of little benefit to our mental health. Therefore, anything that can promote a bit of silliness, provide a challenge and raise a smile to our face surely has to be a good thing. But I do have one bugbear about our fascination with the whole nostalgia trip thing, in that it seems to have driven our popular creative arts industries into rehashing the same ideas over and over. And we ourselves are partly to blame for this, I guess. It seems these days every other new film, book or video game is a sequel, prequel, reboot or reimagining, or at the very least of the same universe. It's fine to be inspired by great creativity, but if all you are going to do is to take the best qualities of that original concept and regurgitate it back out into the world, then in my opinion, you're a bit of a fraud. Our minds are capable of daydreaming up an infinite number of stories, plots, puzzles and games. We don't need to rely on AI or market research to tell us what is popular or what will make the most money. What we need is writers, musicians, artists, directors and programmers with uniquely personal visions which can be brought to the public arena for us all to enjoy. What I like about the retro gaming scene, from what I've learned so far, is that there are a whole new raft of coders that have been inspired by old tech to go on and create new challenges, adventures and scenarios for us all to enjoy for years and years to come. And that is what is ultimately going to keep us coming back for more, time and time again. I recently garnered the opinions of members of the Spectrum Facebook group, asking them about their own personal experiences with reconnecting with the machine, their youth and play, and I want to round up this article by leaving you with some of those important voices.
Hi, about 1987-ish, my parents bought me a ZX Spectrum. Whilst loading the first game, my sister pressed a key and it crashed and never worked after that. So Boxing Day, my dad went to Tundi's and bought me the ZX Spectrum Plus 2, which I still have in the loft. Did anyone else experience this with the original ZX crashing and never working again, or was I just unlucky? I was around 7 at the time and remember it being very traumatic. Hated my sister after that. Well, until Boxing Day, when Dad came to the rescue.
40 years ago, I was a little boy and all I wanted was a ZX Spectrum for Christmas. I knew money was tight and my single mum couldn't afford it. She sat me down and explained that I wasn't going to get it for Christmas, but if I saved my pocket money and paid half myself, she would help me later the next year. I cried that night, but I realised she was right. We couldn't afford it. 3 days before Christmas, my grandmother, Mum's mum, won the bingo and used her winnings to buy my Spectrum. It was to be a massive surprise on Christmas Day and the last present I was to be given. As my mum handed the wrapped box to me, I dropped the fucking thing accidentally on the floor and my mum shrieked. Fortunately, it was fine and worked perfectly. I was excused all chores for the day as long as I ate all my dinner. 40 years on, and I've just accidentally, of course, found out my own kids have bought me the Spectrum. God, I love Christmas and my family.
Every time I load up a game on the Spectrum, the noise, the anticipation, even the smell, take me back to my youth and remind me of so many happy times. I thought those days were gone, but I am so thankful to still have the Spectrum in my life, along with all of you in this amazing community.
Well, since switching on the Spectrum, I've had major flashbacks to that entire era of 8-bit gaming and just how exciting it all was. Just experiencing what the Sinclair could achieve with genius-level programming was a fantastic time. Of course, the Spectrum was the gateway to a lifelong obsession with games, from the ST, Amiga, and all those consoles. It was also quite sad how I lost the love for games eventually, the PS4 being a very hit-and-miss affair. I didn't really put the effort in, as I'd experienced most of the gameplay on offer with previous generations of consoles. And as far as any more future consoles, nope, I'm done. But the Spectrum opened up that love that was buried for games and where it all started.
For me, nostalgia is a big part of where I am in my life. Like vinyl, a resurgence and desire to experience something that has an authenticity, a simplicity and an effort that seems to be missing in music and media today. It's an opportunity to play games I struggled with as a child and share them with my daughter. It's very much an experience thing. The sound of the loading and the playing of the game, how it sparks memories.
I was a Commodore owner. I ugly said to my parents, "Can I have a computer for Christmas with a proper keyboard?" I received a VIC-20 and logically went down this Commodore 64 route, therefore bypassing the Spectrum. I did get to play some games on it at my cousin's house and a school friend. So for me, most of the games I'm replaying are those I've already played on the Commodore computers. I did read a few issues of Crash magazine, which they had in the school library. So for me, owning a Spectrum is a new experience. Yes, I could argue I grew up with home computers and was shaped by them.
The thing that really stands out for me this time round is that the Spectrum is and was an amazing little machine. So nostalgia is not something I associate with it. I'm intrigued by the programming and game development side of things. Learning BASIC is something that I did years ago. Returning to it again is certainly interesting, given how different modern programming is. I see the Spectrum as like a time capsule.
A Child of the Micro was written by Nic Treadwell. The following 8-bit music was used with thanks. Land of the 8-Bits and Boss Time by David Renda at www.feziansstudios.com. The Manic Miner theme by Matthew Smith from 1983. ZX Spectrum chip tune mix from https://zxaaa.net. Game Over and Chip Mode by Danijel Zambo from https://upbeat.io/Danijel-Zambo. My thanks also to members of the Spectrum Facebook group for their contributions.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Nic Treadwell's Homegrown podcast. You can find additional content on Nic's Substack blog, Letters from Storyville, at nictreadwell.substack.com.